All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. This is Mediocre Alaskan Podcast. Got Adam Krick on here. How's it going, man?
Pretty good. How you doing, Jeff?
Good. How's Colorado treating you?
Colorado's pretty good. Definitely a lot more snow where we're at. We're in Pagosa Springs, and so it's 7,400 feet, and so we've been getting a lot of snow, and it's been sticking around. So that's definitely a different feeling than Southeast, where it rains or snows and then rains and it's gone. So
is that a poster of Southeast Alaska behind you there?
Yeah, it is. Yep. It's like the tribute room here.
Yeah, it gets into you, man. It's hard. I was just finishing up a manuscript, and just you find you can complain about Ketchikan so much, or Southeast, with all the rain and the dark, and it's cold and 41 and rainy, and there's not enough snow really to do a lot of outdoor snow recreation, but it's still a pretty stinking good place to live.
Yeah.
Not to rub in your face or anything, but
right. Yeah. I've been really missing it. It's been a hard transition, especially not being a resident here. So I didn't do any hunting in Colorado this year, myself. And so that was different than, 4 months of straight deer hunting most weekends and that kind of stuff. So it's been a tough transition for me.
Yeah. Well, you did more in your time up here than a lot of locals have done. You did the Afognak hunt, and you've done a ton of stuff. So you made the most of the time, which is probably pretty good.
Yeah, it was really fortunate to have those opportunities and the resources to do it. And I definitely miss it. And but yeah, we're kind of moved to a different chapter for a little while anyway.
Yeah. Well, you got good opportunities down there. Now you're on the road system. So now you can look at different states. You can look at most affordable out-of-state hunts. Maybe in some of those areas you don't even need a point or two to draw some of these things. So that kind of opens up some opportunities. I know you're a big fly fisherman too. Mm-hmm. Colorado's a pretty nice place to do that sort of stuff. So have you been doing any winter fly fishing?
I've done a little bit of ice fishing, but a lot of the rivers here are frozen. So we've had quite a bit of snow, and so they're all frozen up right now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, definitely I love doing that stuff. And there's more year-round fly fishing opportunities, I'd say, here than where on a net island, there's not even a steelhead run really. And so that's been good. So I'm looking forward to that. And the road system's nice. You can just drive we're pretty close to New Mexico here. And so there's some opportunities there for some cool hunts and, get back to some of my old hunting areas around here in Nebraska with my family and stuff. So that's all been good. But it is, you miss the stuff, in Alaska for sure. Yeah.
So the reason one of the actually things I wanted to talk to you about was guiding elk in New Mexico. How did that happen?
Yeah, so that was kind of a weird thing. I work at a middle school this year, and so my wife works as one of the family counselors there, or she works with a program called Bridges, where she works with some at-risk students, and she has somebody that works with her in her. It's an older lady, and her husband runs an outfitting business, or they both do. It's called Lobo Outfitters, located in Pagosa. And we got there, and we're just trying to get our feet wet, and we always do, just kind of get out there and see what's around. And we kept talking. Her name's Gwen, and she's like, yeah, we run an elk camp, and, we'd love to have you guys down and come check it out some weekend in October. And so we're like, all right. She's like, this would be a great weekend. You come check out the land. We might want you to guide or something maybe later in the month or whatever. And so it's like, all right, I've never guided. I'm not super successful elk hunter. I've hunted a lot, but, there's specifics to each animal. And so I was pretty upfront about that with her. But so we went down one weekend. It's first rifle season for New Mexico, and I was just going to kind of tag along with somebody and learn the the land. It's like a 12,000 acre ranch that they lease out. They've been leasing it for 30 years, Lobo Outfitters. And, it's not a high fence ranch or anything like that. It's all fair chase. So we went down there, and they had they're trying to do with all the COVID rules. They're trying to have smaller groups of hunters with guides. So 1 or 2 hunters per guide. And so they had another hunter it would have been a group of 3. And so Mike, the main guy, Mike Ray, he's like, well, Adam, do you want to take a guy out tomorrow morning? Sure. And so kind of trial by fire, really, that first weekend.
Nice. It's kind of nice to not be the owner of the business, because there's less pressure, and then all the paperwork and all the insurance and everything else falls to them, and you can just kind of do the thing. So I remember my first year of teaching, you go into the classroom and you're just like, oh my gosh, like what? I didn't do any student teaching. I was on an emergency credential in California. So I got 34 sophomores sitting in this classroom, and I'm thinking, oh man, like, what if they just all walked out? Like, what
right.
I feel, what am I doing here? What the heck is going on here? So obviously hunting or guiding elk is different than that, but were there some similarities about, dude, what am I doing, to like your first day of teaching?
Yeah, very similar. Cause part of you is like, God, are they going to see through me, or are they going to know more than me, or, things like that. And so, yeah, I was really nervous. I did feel some pressure. What was nice is the clientele for this outfitter is kind of an older crowd. Sometimes they're all return people, and so they kind of understand how it works. And the guys that I guided this year were all really, really good guys. And it was a lot of fun. And a lot of it's covering ground, or trying to cover ground and understanding just the layout of the land. And they were all bugling, and so you could kind of locate pretty easily the elk, and that was really helpful. And there's a lot of elk there, and so you were at least seeing elk out when you were going out, which was like, okay, at least we're seeing elk, and we're not like getting skunked totally, to where you feel like you're doing something right. But there was a lot of that, like, gosh, what if we don't get one? What if, what happens? Or, all that was going through my mind, because I felt like they needed to harvest something, because they're paying quite a bit of money to come out. A lot of these guys from back east. And so they come out and they pay a good amount for an out-of-state license plus the guide, and they're staying, at the elk camp and getting fed and all that stuff. And so I was really nervous, not going to lie.
What do you think the common thread is when it comes to starting something new, whether it be teaching or guiding or starting a podcast or anything like that? And then have you been able to kind of get over that, I don't know, inadequacy or inferiority or nervousness or whatever? So what do you think?
I think for me, it's like when I was younger, it was a lot worse. Like as I've gotten older, I understand that people aren't perfect, and that you got to start somewhere, and that if your intentions are right and you're giving a good effort, then you're going to be fine. Usually the results take care of themselves. And so for me, it's usually not being afraid to make mistakes is a huge thing. I used to be really scared to make mistakes. And that was with sports growing up. That was with school, anything. I was just so worried to be wrong, or so worried that I'm going to be incorrect or make a mistake. And I've come to realize that, you go in there and you have some confidence in your abilities. I've hunted quite a bit recently, and, have some good, I've spent, tons of hours in the outdoors. So I understand mountains and climate and weather and animals pretty well. And so just kind of going back to being like, you got it, be confident in yourself, and understand you're going to make mistakes, and no one's going to be like, oh geez, you messed up here. And they're not going to get mad at you. And so I think just having that understanding was really helpful, and just knowing that you might fall on your face. And, our first podcast was probably pretty terrible, and it's still pretty terrible. And, they're getting better, but it's just like fun, and you enjoy it, and you do your best, and don't be afraid to mess up.
Yeah. That was when my buddy told me to start a podcast. I said, all right. And then shortly after I started, I did an intro and, had the music and stuff. And then I was like, is this at all good? And I thought, well, do I even want an intro? And then a couple episodes in, someone said, or I read somewhere that, your 100th podcast is going to be better than your first, but you have to get there. And so it's like, all right, the only way that you work through this is to work through it. Quitting it's not at all going to help. So it's, I've liked, this whole thing is based on your last podcast that I listened to, which I thought was awesome. There's some good stuff that came up with it, which is why we're doing this podcast. But you just get more comfortable, you get better at it, and
right.
It is fun. Again, it's what you want out of it. Is this, if your goal is, all right, and by episode 75, I'm going to have, 2 minutes of sponsors, or, it's going to be like Rogan's podcast and just a ton of sponsors, and you have to fast forward 5 minutes, and I'm going to make so much money, and it's going to be like, you can't. Like most of the best podcasts, it's just that honest, like people talking. The ones where it seems like people try, I don't know. It's hard for me to listen. Like that's exactly what some people want, but as far as what I'm looking for, and you kind of look at the podcast that you like and you emulate that, I guess. Yeah.
I think just being authentic with things is, whatever you're doing, is important too. And just understanding your heart and where it's at, and knowing that that's going to be right no matter what. But there is like some bit of, you always hear fake it till you make it, especially as a teacher. That was what I was told. Like, I don't know, I think in school, like in college, when you're still taking those courses, and everyone's like, oh, fake it till you make it. And you're like, really? Like, because I mean, you know more than the kids, and so if you can kind of, keep working through that, it's going to get better, and it's going to be good.
Like I've thought about that a lot. And at some point you're faking it, but then you end up learning it. And so you make it because you've put forth the effort to learn it. I think some people try to fake it, and they just never learn it. And so they never end up really making it because they've been faking it the whole time and haven't learned anything. So you learn that. It's kind of the trial by error type thing. We're just staying with it.
Yeah. It's very similar to that. But yeah, it was quite the experience that first weekend.
So what about the hunting thing, and how is that? Like you're in a new state and you're trying to learn stuff, and the outdoor content has, there's so much out there. It's connected us to different ideas and different hunts and everything. And I realized that there's, mule deer in Wyoming, and maybe I can do this. And so it looked like a lot of fun, but then you're going down there and you never hunted Wyoming mule deer. So I did find that there were certain things that were kind of consistent when it comes to hunting tactics. So what are some of the universal hunting tactics that you may have found from your diverse hunting experiences?
So I think just kind of off the top, I'd say the first thing is the wind is huge always. And so, just going back to that New Mexico where I was just kind of thrown into that last minute, it was like, well, you got to know your wind, right? You got to know how to move quietly through the woods. Those are two really important things. And then you got to, be able to locate animals. And so with elk in the fall, it's really nice because they are really vocal. And so locating animals was really easy. And then, understanding the thermals in the different valleys that we were hiking was big. And so just, being on top of that, helped with your success of seeing animals and eventually, harvesting one. But then also just kind of knowing that they're really smart and you need to move really quietly. And those are all, I think, part of it. And then I think just understanding the terrain. is really big too. Just understanding where there's a valley, maybe there's a creek, and that's going to change the wind, or there's a bowl, up on this side hill here. And you always want to come in from whatever side based on what the wind usually does. And so trying to understand all that is all basic stuff that will make you at least be in the game to be successful.
The movement was something that it made me feel so much more exposed and less confident when I was out hunting with Abby, and just seeing someone else move. And I thought, oh my gosh, you pick up that movement so easily. Mm-hmm. And so even if you do get the wind right, even if you got the thermals tacked down, if you're moving and you're exposed, it's so obvious. And it felt pretty daunting after the first couple of days. I just thought, like, how do you get anywhere? And how can you glass? Or even like moving your head, is that going to be enough that's going to set something off? So you're kind of paranoid about that. You feel so much more safe here because you can tuck into the woods, or you're in the woods most of the time. You can tuck up behind a fold or some sort of texture up in the alpine. But when you're out on those rolling hills or any of that terrain, you can even see stuff walking through the woods because you don't have that same level of brush and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, that it was challenging too, because it's not nearly as thick. And so, just understanding shadows was a big part of it, is just kind of staying in those shadows along the edges instead of, a matter of a couple feet can make a huge difference. And luckily there, you didn't have to wear orange. And it was pretty wooded. It had a nice mix of spruce and aspen trees. And so the Quakies or the aspens have that white bark, and they're kind of have black splotches. And so you can stay pretty concealed moving in that. And then just kind of understanding how the elk are moving, from they're usually in those feeding in those meadows in the morning, early mornings. And then, as it heats up, they're moving up into that darker timber and are going to bed. And so just kind of understanding what they're generally going to be doing can kind of help you pick where you're going to be moving, and maybe you want to try to cut them off from their bedding area, or, try to catch them in the meadow feeding, was kind of a big tactic that we used. And we were rifle hunting. And so obviously you're not getting within 30 yards rifle hunting. And so you can glass. It was big meadows, big expansive meadows. So you could, be glassing from the edge, a few hundred yards at least in some areas. And so that was a big deal. I imagine that glassing in Wyoming on your hunt was even more important because it was more open probably.
Yeah. It was funny that after all that glassing, we never saw anything that was further than about 200 yards away. And so I don't know if we'd spooked them out, whatever. When it ended up happening, it was the day that the weather had changed, and everyone had talked about, once it starts you get the weather change, you get some snow that's going to move the deer. And it did. And, it was within 300 yards that I saw that one. But up to that point, you were glassing far, we were glassing mid, we were glassing short, and just weren't seeing really anything up until that last day when the weather changed.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a big difference between Afognak elk hunting and New Mexico elk hunting. Was anything the same? Did you send up an electric bear fence just for the fun of it?
Yeah, no, it was about as different as you could get. I would say, yeah, there's very few black bear around this area. It's near Chama, which is a pretty well-known New Mexico area. It has really big elk, or really good elk down there. So, I mean, besides the species of elk, I guess they feed out, in the meadows, which is just similar. And I would imagine the ones on Afognak are going to be bedding in that there's those thick timber veins that kind of run up the hillsides. And so I'd imagine that they bed down in there. But it was early October, same time of year, but the ones on Afognak had already rutted, and so they weren't vocal at all, or we didn't hear any. And so in these ones in New Mexico, so I worked with them for the whole month of October. Like every weekend I'd go down on Friday and hunt that weekend and come back Sunday night. And so they were bugling that entire month, which was, I thought was late, because I've archery hunted elk in Colorado, and usually that rut is like September 10th to, the 25th, somewhere in that range, depending on, a lot of people think about the moon and how much moonlight there is, and that'll set off the cow estrus cycle. And so, but it's somewhere in that range. And so I was like, geez, we're late October and these elk are bugling. At least they're still bugling. There wasn't as much rutting action toward the end, but you could still find them. And usually, at that point they had all their cows and stuff, but there wasn't a ton of similarities. You weren't scared of big brown bears, or, the weather was much milder, sunny days. It got cold at night, but oh man, by 9 a.m. it was just gorgeous and really sunny and nice. So
I drew that Etolin tag, I think my third year up here, so pretty early on. And all the research I did, well, there wasn't much, like, to research, and then no one mentioned anything. And I talked to a couple of people in Ketchikan about that hunt. Not a person mentioned anything about bugling, about cow calls, about anything. It was just about looking for them. And if it was early in the season, they may still be in the Alpine, and we'd had a pretty nice September. And so a buddy said, you might check in the Alpine. So get in one of those higher lakes, fly into there, and then they might still be around there. And then the 2 weeks before that ended up being really nasty and cold. So we figured they moved them down. So we flew up to that lake and we didn't see anything. But, you're up top there. You can't glass anything. Like southeast here, there's no glassing, there's no sitting, and there's no making a move on some of those areas that you're looking across to another little hill. You're not heading down and heading back up. Like, well, they're over there and I'm over here, and it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So what? I don't know if you can really compare it, but like, which one would you do Afognak again? Would you want to do your own archery hunt in New Mexico? Would you want to do rifle in Colorado? Like, of those three, like, can you rank them? Is it?
I mean, I think Afognak just has that, I don't know, mystery about it, where there's, Kong Island, and the brown bears and the elk are just that much bigger, their body wise. And so I think they're hard to compare. I think archery hunting elk, and I've never gotten one, but I've been really close, and I've had really good encounters with them, and hearing them bugle is right up there with any outdoor experience I've had. So I don't know. It's really hard to compare them. I definitely think that getting an elk with a bow is really high on my list, that I would really like to do. I would definitely go back to Afognak if I had the time and resources, because that was just an amazing experience, and just such an adventure. You're so much more remote than anywhere in the lower 48. You're counting on weather and planes, and they're dropping you off and see you later in 5 days or whatever. And here you got a truck you can hike back to. So there's just differences. And I would say that probably Afognak, I would say, would probably be more strenuous just because the terrain is so much harder, just like Southeast, like you said, you see one across the valley, like, okay, you're not going to go get it when you're in Southeast because you're dropping off a cliff or bushwhacking up through, just nasty jungle. Whereas, Colorado and New Mexico, you can cover, more than a mile an hour really easily. Mm-hmm. Whereas there, if you're covering a mile an hour, you are going. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, it's really hard to rank it. I mean, Afognak, that is a safe spot, or a really dear spot in my heart. Like, I will never forget that hunt ever. But I mean, just being close to elk and hearing them bugle is something else. Just gets your heart pounding.
Yeah. I think there's the ranking for the sake of ranking. I'm not sure that's beneficial, but I do think there's something about ranking or prioritizing, mm-hmm. because there are certain things you might want to do a second time before you do something else first, potentially. And then I'm assuming that you don't have a whole bunch of points built up in some of these other states. So, I don't even know why I would dream about hunting Arizona, because I'm already so far behind. And even like some of the premium spots in Wyoming, I'm too far behind. I need 13 or 12 points by this point. So I can't dream about the epic Wyoming hunt. But if I think, all right, well, maybe a more crowded unit, I can maybe draw with 2 or 3 points. Mm-hmm. And then go into it looking at, it might be for a spike or a smaller one and being totally happy with that. Or do I want to prioritize something that's here on the home turf? Mm-hmm. Those are interesting problems to have going forward, I guess.
Yeah. And I think for me at this point, my priority would be to try to harvest an elk with a bow down here.
Cow first or go right to the bull?
I think I'll probably just get either sex, and then whatever, if I get an opportunity, I'm not going to be picky. Most of the stuff in Colorado is 4-point or better. I'm pretty sure all of it is. But you can also get a cow. So any smaller bulls you have to pass. But that's my priority right now. But I think when I was in Alaska, it was like Afognak for sure. But then that Etolin hunt is like, that's like the next level of like extreme difficulty, because I think Southeast is worse hiking than Afognak, and then you're going to try to pack a giant bull out of that stuff is just in finding them. There's no openings. Yeah. And so I think that's I've heard it called the hardest hunt in Alaska. I'm not sure, but yeah, I would imagine it's right up there.
That's probably why I drew it. They're like, well, okay, this guy has no idea, so let's protect the population and let's send him there, because there is no chance that he has any idea what he's going to do.
Yeah. I think that one would be awesome, but really difficult. I think you'd have to have a couple weeks where you could have a boat and kind of find your spot, and I don't know, try to spot them and do that.
That's the tough thing about that is, if we were up top and we heard 2 gunshots lower than us and 2 people had shot nice bulls, and we actually got a discount on our flight back to Ketchikan because they'd gone and they'd picked up the first load of meat. So it was 3 of us and then the meat from someone else's kill. It was weird because there was like a little bit of cell phone reception. So this is the day before we were going to get picked up, and like, well, at this point, we can't shoot anything really. Like, it's not going to happen. So you might as well come pick us up because the weather's good. And the guy said, do you mind flying with someone else's elk? I was like, oh man, really? I thought that. I didn't say that. But I was like, yeah, that's fine. He said, cool. We'll knock a couple $100 off. He's like, oh, cool. So they came, picked us up, and sure enough, there were some game bags, and it was leaking onto the floor as we were packing in. Like, man, good for them. But they had gone. They were a lot lower. And there's some lower areas, and it was already in the timber. So some people go there with their boats, and then they hike up I'll let people fly in, but like it's one or the other. Like it's not a cover ground type thing. It's not a go faster, stay hard or longer. You're just throw enough miles at it. Like no one is there, so you don't have to worry about people. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of knowing where the elk are, and you just can't see through it.
No, yeah, and you got to have a job that you can have that time, which makes it really hard, especially in the fall.
Yeah. But unlike the mountain goat hunt, that would be something that I would love to draw, which I won't. But over the counter, that would definitely be on the list. Did you got something other than elk in Colorado that's in mind?
Yeah, I think I'm going to put in for mule deer rifle. I think, and so I'll try to do archery elk, which there's a bunch over the counter, so I'll probably just put in for a point, and then I have some areas that I went before we moved to Alaska that were. We saw good numbers and had some encounters. And so I'll probably try to do that and then try to do mule deer, I think third season, which is like late October, around here, hopefully. And then I went to Nebraska this year and for whitetail. And so I'd like to do that again with my dad and uncle and cousin. So that was pretty good. Fun. Didn't get anything, but
I'd like to do whitetail hunt. It'd be fun. But it seems like once you start getting east of Wyoming, Colorado, there's just so much more private land. What is it? Oklahoma's like 98% private, and Texas is the same thing. And so if you're hunting a ranch, if you're going to Texas, even though they have everything, like any sort of animal can live there, is living there on private land. But I think heading east or really far east would be kind of fun, like a Kentucky or something like that for some of that mule deer stuff. But again, a lot of private.
Right. Yeah. Anything basically. Yeah. East of Colorado, there's a ton of private. My parents bought like 80 acres in Nebraska. And that's all people hunt is private land. And so we hunt that. Which is great. It's fun. It's really fun it's like an easier hunt because you can go home for lunch and you can, get it and drag it to your truck versus packing it out. So it's just a different type of hunting. It's not your adventure hunting, your backpack hunting that I really, really enjoy, but it is like more about, you're hunting with your dad, which is awesome, and your cousin and your uncle. And, it's more about that kind of stuff. And it's tree stand hunting is what we do, which I don't know how to do apparently, because I missed one with my bow and it was like, what the, so it's just a different type of hunting. But it's more about who you're doing it with, and it's good. So
you can find any hunt you want. You can find a ton of information about it, videos, YouTube stuff, except for Etolin. But do you think the proliferation of social media on public land hunts, do you think that's been good? Because it connects us to different hunts that we didn't know about and awesome experiences. But at the same time, is it leading too many people to these areas? What do you got on that?
Yeah, I am the guy that loves to explore and find my spots, myself. And obviously I've found spots doing a bunch of research and things like that, but I think it has brought a ton more hunters into those areas. Public land, it's like every time you see a video, it's like DIY public land. They have to have the public land to make it that much better. And so then I do think a ton more people are realizing that there is a lot out there. And before it was kind of like, well, you don't have land. Your land is the forest, national forest or wilderness. So it's like, all right, well, I'm going to go do that. And so if you have an adventuresome spirit and you're, I love finding new places and going over the next ridge and, finding the lake that no one's been to for years and all that kind of stuff. It does kind of hinder it. And you're kind of like, how did you get here? Like I ran into guys like bow hunting before we left, like from Nebraska where I was. And I was like, wait, how did you find out about this? And it's like this small, like, or it's an over-the-counter unit, like not near, like, it's like, why are you here? Mm-hmm. And so I do think it is like, selfishly, I'm like, gosh, like, I don't want you guys here. You know, I know this area. I've hiked it. I've done my miles on the ground. But at the same time, you're like, the more people involved with hunting, the longer, you know, we're going to have these resources and conserve these resources and have people that, you know, have a stake in the land and want to keep it how it is. And so I do see the benefit of everything. But at some point they're going to have to go to draw for so many things. Like now Colorado's all draw for mule deer. And I think they went to all draw for elk, but I mean, there's still a bunch of leftover tags, but there was so many archery people last year, they went to draw. And so I think it's going to, you know, shift to where you can't just count on your over the counter tag at some point.
Well, some of those states are reducing their non-resident allotment too. Mm-hmm. Some of them are down to like 10%. So, and you're still going to have a lot of people who want to go there, but you know, 10% such a small amount. To do that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with explaining what the hunt is. It's weird that people have to advocate so much for like the DIY or the public land. And if you're doing some of these DIY Alaska hunts, like you're getting flown out somewhere. So Tok Air Service, whoever, like they're flying you around, you know, and dropping you off, and then you're getting insight from them, but they make it sound like, you know, we just arrived in Anchorage, you know, and hiked up, you know, to Fairbanks and then took a right and figured it out. Like, it's okay to say, okay, we got dropped off by this air service and they gave us some tips and they gave us some maps and, you know, whoever said this and we saw this. Like, it's okay to admit that. Or if you shoot a huge bull on private land, that's fine. You know, like it doesn't make it any less. It means you paid for it and whatever, man. Are you happy? That's fine.
Right.
But it is, you know, seeing certain people that draw certain tags, and it's because they're not going to be back to hunt it again, giving them really inside information. And so the person who has worked really hard to figure that out, and then all of a sudden someone's in their backyard. And I remember growing up in Klawock and going to some of these spots on the river that weren't clearly marked. And then someone showing up like a Cabela's model. And it's like, how do you know about this spot? You know, this isn't marked. Right. Like right now there's a trail that goes the whole Klawock River, but you know, someone told them, and then all of a sudden that's how stuff gets ruined. And again, they have every right to be there, but you know, it's when you do figure something out and then someone else, they don't feel that ownership. And so they just share it, spread it, you know, and it's kind of like, So I try to keep that in mind when I go to different states and think this is someone's backyard. So I need to, you know, not be a jerk about it, not feel entitled. And, you know, like, let's do this ethics thing, because even though I paid a whole bunch of money to come down here and I paid more money for a deer tag, you know, I'm a guest, you know, it's not just hashtag public landowner and I'm entitled. It's my right to be able to do whatever I want here. Do you have some travel ethics or even some local ethics that you keep in mind because you may or may not be on your home turf?
Yeah, I don't post like very specifics at all. If I ever post a picture of something, and I whoever I go with, I'm like, dude, if you post something with Horizon, I'm going to be pissed at you, you know? And so I like kind of set those rules. And yeah, when I'm like, I fish Wyoming a lot every summer. And, you know, we did that really awesome trip last summer. And so, yeah, just understanding that I am not a local and that I'm learning, and, you know, there's probably people that have found these places before me. And so I'm not going to be out there being like, oh, go to this lake, 'cause, you know, we found, you know, all these trout or whatever. And so I just try to keep it, you know, within the group, really low key, kind of modest about everything. And just kind of, 'cause that's what's going to keep it how you want it, is just, if you want it to be you and your friends or close people, and just keep it between you. And so I try to keep that in mind. And just, you know, having that humble attitude about somebody else put the miles in before you, guaranteed. And so, you know, just treating it like that. And and understanding that. But I have had to, like, on social media, I've like messaged people, like, because they'll tag like whatever wilderness it was, and they'll have this skyline and perfect, and I'm like, hey, you need to like stop doing that. Like, and I don't even know the person, but I'm like, like, this is why everyone goes there. Yeah. So social media, I think, has also taken its toll on some hot spots too.
It was crazy to see how many people were on that trail that we went on, because when I was researching, it looked like it was just lonely spot. You go to those high active, you see how huge the parking lot is. Like, oh, this is well known. So then you go back and you like, there's a lot of spots that kind of hide in plain sight. So there's a difference between going to this high recreation spot and catching what everybody else does versus, you know, what we were looking for at the Goldens. And then I still don't even know where you go for your Goldens, which is pretty funny. I respect that a lot, though. That's cool.
Well, I gave you that spot.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
And I'll go with you whenever you want to go.
Yeah, I might be down there this summer.
Yeah.
Hopefully Abby is getting close with the PhD. Just everything's been kind of fouled up with, you know, this lab down in Texas can't do stuff, you know, because of COVID, and so it just slows everything down. But might be down there for a little bit, but it is fun. You know, you're not in Alaska, and you know you want to do the best that Alaska has because you endure the winters. But it still is pretty nice. It's hard to beat hopper droppers on a nice hot afternoon in the high country there.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah, that's probably my favorite part about being down here is those summers. But yeah, it's just, I think the social media stuff and people blabbing bother me. But it's good stuff. But
have you fished the Frying Pan River?
I have once, and that was, I mean, they're huge. You know, you've probably seen the toilet bowl videos where it labels toilet bowl. Yeah. We did that in the winter, you know, went up at like 4 a.m. and it was cold, you know, and no one was there. But by, you know, first light, people start coming up the banks and they're just waiting for you to like leave, and then they like swoop in. And so that's like combat fishing in probably Anchorage or, you know, some of those places where you just like, you move and somebody just fills your spot and then you just cast in. And so, there's huge fish in there. And so if you want to, you know, 6 to 10 pound rainbow or brown, you got a pretty good shot. I mean, if you look one. So
I wanted to go. I hadn't seen any of those videos about where to really fish on the Frying Pan. I wanted to go there because John Gierach always wrote about it.
Oh,
you know? Yeah. And it was just, oh man, I loved just hearing about those streams and the creeks and always going there. And so we stayed at the Frying Pan River Lodge or something like that, like, you know, 2 or 3 blocks from a little micro brewery. So I was just so excited, you know, being able to hear the river in the background. But when it's like in basalt, it doesn't look like much of a river. It looks like a tiny creek. And then you start driving up and you got to pay attention to private versus public. So I'm using OnX just to see, okay, for the next half mile, you know, we can go on these pullouts. And then there's that little like river camp. So that was all private, and they'd made their own like little, you know, put some rocks in there to create some more habitat so the fish would be there. And I thought, oh man, this is probably not what it was.
No, I think Gierach has, I mean, some of his books they're a little bit older. But he talks about, you know, deckers and stuff like that, which is similar. And you go there now and it's like, you look upstream and you see 15 people. Yeah. And it's just like, man, this is way different.
It's tough because, you know, like those sort of rivers, if you don't hear about any of the rivers, like, can you imagine being like 60, 70 years old, you know, and if you can barely walk and you're like, oh dude, I didn't even know about this. Like, wait, mule deer hunting? Like it's definitely that double-edged sword. Cause if you don't hear about things, then you don't go to places. So I don't know, maybe it would be better to be blissfully unaware. And if you just lived on Prince of Wales and and only hunted blacktail, then that'd be pretty fun, I guess, and same thing with black bear and steelhead fish. But then once you've heard an elk at midnight in your tent, like, dude, what is that? It's totally different. But, you don't hear about that, or, you don't know about it until you've seen stuff. And one of the first things that you do if you are, researching a hike is you look, okay, how far is the hike? Is there fishing opportunities? Because, if you hike in 6 miles to some lake that there's no fishing or they haven't stocked, then, oh, dude. But yeah, it's tough. It's, yeah, especially as the outdoor writer who, ruins stuff.
Right.
I try to be as, especially with Southeast Alaska steelhead, there have been times where I'm like, I don't want to name the rivers. I don't want to, there are certain rivers here that have really no content about them. And there's a reason for that. And you can't go research certain rivers and get YouTube videos or get art magazine articles. And, traveling anglers haven't come up here. So that's good. And that's what's preserving it.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to know the balance because at some point somebody told you, or you read about it, or, probably, I've read, countless books to research regions, and then you find gems on your own. And that's part of it, is just coming across those that you had no idea. You're hiking to one that you think has what you want, and then you're stopping off and you find, something that's awesome. And so it kind of becomes part of your little book of spots that you have. And then, it kind of goes from there. But yeah, I don't know.
It's kind of thing with fishing, you kind of know fish are there. So, you can fish it and you can figure it out. With hunting, sometimes you just have to feel like, okay, I have to feel confident about it. I can't think about how many other people have walked this, what I think is an overlooked little patch. Even like hunting Gravina. It's like the place is crazy. The word is so out on that. But if you go there thinking, that was at the end of the season, I was like, no, they're all dead. There's none left. And so, you don't hunt it right versus, all right, I got to hunt this right. I know this is the highest traffic area here. I just got to hunt it right. And I got to do things right because I'm sure there's something around here, but man, it's kind of tough to do.
Yeah. It takes some discipline, and that's for sure. And I do think hunting's different because the animals are moving, and you can kind of scout areas and say, this is a good looking area. This is kind of what they want. There's feed, there's places to bed, there's a good water source, those sort of things that help with that too. But yeah, it definitely takes discipline, especially Gravina when they post the harvest rates and you're like, whoa, they took that many deer off of there in 2019 or 2018. And then 2019 was, I think it was even higher. I'm not sure what it looked like this year, but
I think there was a big drop off one of those years. I think 17 was huge, 18 was bigger, 19 dropped off. And then this year, the people who know the most are the guys who work the ferry. And then you can just see like the little peak in the back of the truck as you're driving. And then, it's like, a little, look at this guy. That's why he's coming back at 2, he's not. But sometimes you get it the other way, and the reputation is going to be a ton of people. And sometimes it's not as busy as you expect, or because you're expecting super busy, it ends up being better. Have you had it go the other way where you hear or read about expecting crowds, tons of people, but it ends up being kind of quiet? And maybe because everybody reads that it's an absolute mess, that keeps people from going there. So the hype ends up working in your favor. Have you ever had that happen?
Well, I guess last summer I was expecting more. I honestly was expecting that lake where we camped in the Wind Rivers to be packed.
Yeah.
Just from what I read, it was like, there's so many climbers that go up there. There's just a really good trail, bunch of lakes, like a lot of more recreators versus fisher people. So that was surprising to me. But more often than not, I think I guess the Beartooth last year, I did a big loop with a buddy, and we saw like 2 other people the whole trip, and I was expecting to see, you know, a fair number. It's a pretty well-known, written about area, lots of lakes, but we were not competing ever for fish. And so, but again, I think I think I've had the other way more often though, where I have some spots, and then this year, last summer, I went up there, and it's the earliest I'd been in there, and there was people in there, and I was like, damn. But
we did a hike in the Sawtooths in Idaho, and it was so it looks again like there's nothing there, no one there, but then you show up to the parking lot like, oh boy, this is crazy. And it was a loop trail. And so tons of people everywhere. At the first lake, there was like no fish. And then like you couldn't even find a rock in the woods that hadn't already been used. Like you're looking for that one to smash, and like every rock you're flipping over, it's toilet paper, and it's just a matter of how fresh the thing is underneath it. You're like, dude, this is
wow.
It was crazy. It was absolutely, I mean, it was a beautiful hike for sure, but so many people coming both sides. So it wasn't like, you know, everyone starts on this side and goes around. So you're kind of working together. It was people coming up over the pass while you were going the opposite direction. Totally beautiful. But there wasn't like that option to get past people, which we had where we went. You know, it seemed like first lake, after the first lake, there were fewer people. And after the next lake, there were fewer people. And then where we camped, there were different options that you could kind of branch off. And I think that principle kind of plays in. It's, you know, you hunt Gravina, you can just road hunt. And that's what a lot of people do. They just drive on the roads. Or you can park and you can go a little bit further and then, you know, stay a little bit. So there's that principle of you go to a high population density, there's a high hunter fisherman density, but you can still get further away or find a solo spot if you're willing to walk.
Yeah, and I think that's what's different about hunting too, is a lake concentrates people when you're going to fish, and so that kind of is hard to get away. But for hunting, you know, you can hike farther and more remote, and likely you're going to be around less people, and so that is a really nice part about hunting too. I mean, Gravina, there's spots that are really hard to get to, you know, especially on that, you know, on the straight side where the weather's always crap. If you can, you know, somehow get over there, you know, there's, you know, the more effort you put in, definitely going to have less people and probably better chances. Yeah.
That's where Abby and I ended up getting our mule deer on a small little spot. We just hunted it hard and hunted it right and waited for the snow. And it would just, you know, it's a very small little cube. It was one of those spots that we thought would be overlooked, and it wasn't overlooked, but we happened to go there when it was snowy and just, you know, figured it out and did it right. And you look at some of the amount of days that some of these people hunt and the success rate, you know, and you think, well, what are they doing? So even though there's a ton of people, not a lot of tags, not a lot of public land, you know, what is the most likely thing that people are going to do? And they're going to shortchange it somehow. You got to believe in that. You got to think that they're just going to road hunt it, or they're going to, you know, stay. They're not going to glass ride. They're going to do something wrong. And as long as you do something right, I think you can still get that confidence. I think that's what I learned of that Wyoming trip, and makes me more looking forward to some other experiences in other areas, and just remember that, okay, it worked out because I did this, and just do what other people aren't willing to do, and you can have a good experience. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but you know, that's going to at least increase your odds.
Right. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. If you can be tougher than most people, you're probably going to be more successful, because a lot of it's enduring the elements, right? I mean, you guys had some really hard weather, and in Southeast, it's always tough weather. And so if you can endure and you're tougher, and you can be like, all right, I'm going to be uncomfortable today, and I'm going to be wet, and I'm going to push to this next spot and call, and you know, it's going to pay off. And so, yeah, being tougher and determined and willing to put in the work, being uncomfortable is all part of it. And that's what makes the experience stick. Is it's not like you remember those bluebird days where You remember those really hard days where it rained really hard or snowed or whatever, and you thought that it sucked and it didn't. So,
yeah. Well, that was a pretty good closer. So how about you finish up with where people can find the podcast and listen to it, and get your Instagram posts with all that real special secret information about where to hunt.
Yeah, I haven't posted in a while. Yeah. So we have a podcast. It's called @Tongass Talk. You can find that on Instagram. And you can listen to it on any podcast app or platform. I think Apple or Android. So it's @Tongass Talk. But we talk similar stuff, hunting, fishing, outdoors. We've kind of branched out a little bit to some other stuff that's been pretty fun lately. So, but yeah.
Great.
So you can find us.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Take care, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, good talking to you, Jeff.
All right. See you, man.
See you.